Martin is the founder of Matrix Men, an organization and the first of its kind in South Africa, or in Africa, hey Martin, to really spearhead the wellness of men, particularly around abuse, histories of abuse, and really doing recovery programs or coaching for men. So I'm excited, Martin. Welcome. I'm excited to have you. I think we don't often have conversations like these, but yeah, I think it's so apt, and not to attribute the abuse stories of men to what we're seeing in the news headlines. But I have this inkling, and maybe we can touch on that in the chat, that some of the things we're seeing around GBV, which unfortunately is to the exclusion of men in our country, could probably possibly be explained by some of the things that you probably deal with at Matrix Men. So yeah, Matrix Men, please tell us a little bit more about what led to you founding Matrix Men.
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I didn't realize why my life was such a mess. It really didn't make any sense. I woke up just about every morning going like, oh God, I'm still alive. I don't want to be alive. I hate life. I hate the world. I hate everything, And it was in about 2010, I think it was. Yeah, 14 years ago now, when I heard Tyler Perry and on Oprah Winfrey show.
Yeah.
It was a show called The 200 Men, and he and the 200 men were talking about me, essentially, right? Sounded like they were like talking about how I felt and how I dealt with the world and how everything happened to me, and it just felt so weird. For the first time in my life, it seemed like these people understood me.
Sure.
And I kind of listened, and the weirdest thing is because throughout the show they were talking about, and then he molested me, and then he raped me, and then he did, and he sexually abused me, and my brain kept saying, "Oh, that's not me. That never happened to me. That never happened to me."
Yeah.
And right at the end, somebody said, one of the guys stood up, was right at the end of the show. It was the last guy to talk. The weirdest thing. And he said, I just want to say something, that if you're a father and you've got children, you will never hurt them because you love them too much. And that got me.
Sure.
Man. Because I remember once I was changing my daughter's nappy, and this thought that I was going to do something horrible to her came across my brain, and it was out of character, because my ex-wife and I had been trying for 10 years to have children,
Sure.
And I tell that story often, It was like I relate the story. It's like I was looking at her, and she was lying there. She must have been about 6 months old, and this little devil popped up on my shoulder and said, "Oh, you're going to hurt her. You're going to do something bad to her." And then the little angel came up and said, "No, you're not. You love her too much." And I remember I was at a talk, and I was telling that very story, and this lady, everybody left, and this lady was kind of hovering around there, and I went up, and I know from what I talk about, I know, okay, they're embarrassed about their story. They want to talk to me.
Right.
So I went up to her and I said, "Are you okay? I hope I didn't, I didn't say too much that made you feel bad." And, she says, "No, I just want to tell you that I relate to the angel and the devil story." And I was like, "Huh?" And she said, "Yeah. I used to bath my son, and I used to have that same war in my head. People, saying, I'm going to hurt my son, or I'm going to do something sexual to my son." And then the angel going, "No, you're not, because you love him too much." And she said she had this war. It was a horrible. So it was kind of enlightening for me to realize that it wasn't just men that go through this. And this is the thing about, sexual abuse, is that men and women go through it, but we're only talking about one side of the story, you see.
Yeah.
And this Oprah show kind of brought me to a point where I finally realized I'm not the only one.
Sure. Sure.
So I went through 6 months of sheer hell. I kid you not. It was rough, I started remembering things that I honestly didn't want to remember. It was difficult. It was really hard. For like 6 months, memory after memory after memory after memory just started flooding back into my life.
Sure.
And the things that must have been five people in my life that sexually abused me.
Sure.
So from the age of 5 to the age of 19, I was a victim. And yeah, it was just weird. But the thing is that once I dealt with that initial shock, then yeah, it got better. It got a lot better.
Mm.
And I remember I started recalling a lot of stuff about what my mom used to do to me. And that was like, man, that was a punch in the gut. It was really, I mean, we all want mummies that love us and hug us and kiss us and nurture us. And,
Yeah.
my mom was a little bit different. Whatever happened in her life, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I kind of forgiven her for whatever she did to me because I know life is tough.
Mm.
She grew up during the war in Germany, in Holland. The Germans were occupied Holland.
Mm.
So I don't know. I don't know what happened in her life. She's not telling me. So,
Yeah.
but that's it. But the night I started remembering that, I thought to myself, you know what? If this is so difficult for me, I can't imagine what it's like for other men. And that night I made the decision that I would tell my story as often and as loud and everywhere I could. So I could give other men permission to heal like I was given permission to heal by Tyler Perry and his guys.
Sure.
So it's just when we relate, when we relate our stories and we understand each other and we go like, oh, that happened to me. Okay. I'm not alone,
Yeah.
So it's been a long journey. It's been a long 13 years
Yeah.
after I found Matrix Men. It hasn't been
Yeah.
easy. It's been tough, but I'm not giving up,
Good. So good, Martin. That statement you made, permission, giving yourself permission to heal, giving others permission to heal, and that it came through hearing other men have a conversation. I think it's so powerful because I think it kind of leads me to the next point. But before I get to that point, you said that this lady, when she came up to you, was saying, I've had this dynamic before. I've had this situation. I had the devil and the angel on my shoulder. And I want to almost ask, because I don't want to assume that it's the same for every person who's a survivor of abuse, particularly sexual abuse. But what are the, I want to call sort of, I want to say, characteristic things, because for a lot of us, we may not have vocabulary around some of the things we've experienced. We may not even have vocabulary around what we're observing in those close to us who've possibly experienced it. But you can tell there's something maybe different. Maybe there's a way that they present themselves in relationships or in connections that you know that instinctively. I had a therapist say this to me when she says each human being instinctively knows when somebody else has a psychological issue or struggle, which I thought is so true, because we may not have words for it, but are there markers or indicators for these things that we can see in a loved one or see in a child, where you're like, you can tell that there's something that isn't right?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's start with relationships. So before you even get married, right?
Yeah.
So the very first indicator is, have you been abused as a child?
Mm.
Okay. Because we kind of have this tendency to be drawn to people who've been through similar dynamics as we have.
Sure.
And we go, wow, we're soulmates. You're soulmates because you relate to one another's pain. Okay.
Sure.
And that pain is kind of what shapes you as an adult.
Yeah.
So your first indicator is always, and I hear it so often, it travels through families, and it's just, yeah, it's like a disease, honestly.
Yeah.
And so first indicator is, are you a victim of any form of abuse, childhood trauma? Because I can bet you that you will be attracted to somebody, a man, woman, or whatever, who's been through something similar.
Right.
And you are going to get into a relationship because you think you understand one another and you're hoping that you're going to make one another
Yeah.
happy, and it's not going to
Yeah.
work. Right? The
Yeah.
first course of action is, if you've suffered some form of trauma and childhood trauma and that sort of stuff, deal with it.
Right.
And get help, join one of my recovery courses or something, anything, just get help.
Right.
Because it changes the way that you interact with the
Yeah.
world. Second thing is, if you're in a relationship and you're married and you've had children and you were a victim of abuse, trauma, sexual abuse, whatever, chances are pretty good that your child is also going to suffer
Oh
the same.
gosh.
And it's the weirdest dynamic because we do everything that we can to prevent it, yet we kind of push our children away,
Mm,
right? So
mm,
instead of teaching our children the skills to kind of be confident enough to tell somebody, don't touch me,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We try and protect them, we try and isolate them, we try and wrap them in cotton wool, and we don't give them the skills, and bam, they end up being victimized as well.
Right.
And so these are the first indicators for you and your family, right? Secondly, if you've not been in any sort of major trauma or anything like that, when your child comes home and suddenly their behavior changes,
Mm,
right? So if they were quiet and they become loud, or if they were loud and they become quiet, right?
mm,
If they suddenly were obedient children and now they become obnoxious and confrontational and all that sort of stuff. If they slept well, now they don't sleep well. They're having nightmares. So suddenly you'll see little flips happening, right? Didn't used to wet the bed, now they wet the bed. Somebody
mm,
phoned me the other day, says, I've got a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old, two men, right, in the same brothers, and they still wet their beds. I'm
sure.
going like, well, okay, that's major trauma,
Yeah.
right? It's just one of those uncontrollable things that we do when we sleep in. So any sudden change, so what out of character for your child, something's
Mm,
happened, you know? And then if you're trying to get into a relationship, remember the five. Now, this is mainly for men. Men are given 5 coping mechanisms to deal with trauma in life and all that sort of stuff,
right.
right? I call them sex, silence, sport, addiction, and anger.
Mm,
Okay. So let's start with the sex. Pornography, masturbation,
mm,
can't stay faithful, constantly chasing the
mm,
girls. Yeah,
mm,
even though he's in a serious relationship, he's constantly out there trying to, chat the girls up and, oh, I'm just being charming. No, you're not. You're being an idiot because you're in a relationship. And if you're in a committed relationship, you are committed to that person, right?
right.
Pornography, they can't, porn, nothing wrong with porn. They're trying to convince you to get into it and all that sort of stuff. Now, not anyone on its own is not a major red flag, but when you get a combination of these 5, like 2 or 3 of the
Okay.
5, then you know you got an issue, right? So for men, I'm talking men's characteristics. So that's the sex. So it includes masturbation, porn, cheating, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Silence. If he comes home from work and he's just like goes into his room, sits down, watches TV all the time, watching, I'm not going to go to the rugby and that sort of stuff, but he's just quiet. I've got to
Right.
work, I'm online chatting to people all the time, kind of avoiding talking to you, right?
Mm,
That's silence. Doesn't want to interact with people because he's afraid to
mm,
interact with people because that means he might say something out of place or whatever the case may be. Sport. Comes home Friday night, watches soccer, watches cricket, watches Formula One, watches tennis, watches, always out playing sport all the time. He's out doing the soccer every weekend, and it's just an avoidance tactic so that he doesn't have to deal with family or all that sort of thing,
right.
or girlfriends or wives. And so sex, silence, and sport. And then you got addiction, which is alcohol. Every weekend they have to get drunk.
Sure.
It's a problem.
Sure.
Okay. Using drugs, illicit drugs. Oh, let's just take some it's only once on the weekend. And, you even got nowadays, you've got like psilocybin or magic mushrooms, and the guys are constantly, I'm going to a psilocybin trip this weekend. Yeah,
Sure.
no, it's just avoidance. You're doing it every weekend, it's avoidance. It's a
Sure.
coping mechanism. So whatever, addiction and anger,
Right.
big one. You feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells. You have
Mm,
to avoid talking. You're afraid to talk about topics because you don't know what's going to set them off and make them angry.
sure.
Punch doors, punch walls. And it starts off like that, and eventually it can escalate into absolute violence, into gender-based violence. So
Yeah.
those are the 5 major traits that men are given to deal with life.
Mm,
Women are quite different because they'll manipulate and coerce. So women that try to change your character, well, that's not cool. You often hear your friends, he's not a perfect man, but I'll change
sure.
him. You're like, why do you want to change him? If you don't
Sure.
like him, leave him.
Right.
And and it becomes obsessive to change him because they're afraid they're not good enough to get another partner. So they try and shape what they've got into what they think they want.
Oh gosh.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So ladies, if you want to make a man somebody different, don't work. Forget it. Move on, find somebody else.
Right.
There is a perfect person out there for you, you know.
Right.
So ladies will try and manipulate, try and coerce,
Mm.
try and change people. It becomes, I see a lot more violence in ladies these days as
Sure.
well. It's becoming a thing now. But anger as well. So you do something, she can't talk to you rationally. She just gets angry, you know what I mean? And then has a hissy fit for 5 days. She gives you the silent treatment. Dude, move out, move on.
Right.
It's trouble, you know.
Right.
So those are the traits to find out in children, men,
Right.
women. Best
Interesting.
advice I can give, right?
Sure. Sure, thanks, Martin. I think that helps because, and I like that you said, it's a combination of either, so it's not to say that if you see one dominant one, this is what has happened, because of course there are a myriad of other things that a person could have gone through.
Absolutely.
But that's really helpful. And I'm interested to know through the work you've done through Matrix Men, because I think the conversation of GBV in South Africa, again, like I said, is quite focused to, violence against women, really, and children,
Yes.
but mostly towards women as well. And I don't want to minimize that, because I think we do have a bit of an issue around it, or at least it's documented well. But what is the statistics? I'm interested to know what are the stats around men, because that's not something you hear about.
I was going to give you, I'm going to tie the two together for you, right? So it's always been an issue. I mean, South Africa is like the rape GBV capital of the world, right? It's disgusting what happens in this country.
Yeah.
And there has to be a cause. There's always a cause. I've never met a 5-year-old boy who says, when I grow up, I want to beat my wife and rape her.
Sure.
Or rape women.
Yeah.
I've never met a little girl that says, when I grow up, I want to be a horrible narcissistic wife or, angry and that sort of manipulative and whatever. Life doesn't work like that, right? So something comes in and changes these children. So what happens between age 5 and age 15, where they suddenly become these horrible people, manipulative, narcissistic, abusive, angry, violent rapists, whatever the case may be. And when I use the term rapist, I'm talking both genders, right? Because as much as we refuse to accept the fact women rape too. Of course. And we're starting to realize through research, a friend of mine did a study on human trafficking, and she interviewed men that were victims of human trafficking, and 50+% of them were trafficked by a woman or bought by women. Okay. And don't think, well, more women are trafficked than men. No, that's not true. It's about equal. All right. Especially now, mummies with sons, please keep them off phones, keep them off Xbox, keep them off all these things.
Interesting.
I heard there's a ring that is targeting Spotify children's playlists.
Unbelievable.
Right? So these guys pose as children and they target these kids and then they start manipulating them. And then you get what we call online trafficking, right? So they get the child to send an image of them naked, and then they start blackmailing them, and then it just becomes more brutal. And quite often with boys, teenagers, it ends up in suicide. So we're seeing this escalation in teenage suicides because of online trafficking. So, sorry, I run off, right? So the stats in South Africa are this, right? 44% of all boys will have suffered sexual abuse by the age of 18.
Goodness. Just under half.
Okay. That's nearly half the South African male population, right?
Yeah.
But what happened is this study was conducted in 2006. 2007, the law change happened, and we dropped the age of consent. Yes. That doesn't write off this first study, because it was interesting in that it was the first study that looked at the gender of the perpetrator on boys, right? So what they came back and they found that 27% of the boys had been sexually abused by both male and female, 32% had been abused by men, and 41% of them had been abused by women. Okay, so look at then in 2016, for all the wrong reasons in the world, somebody decided they were going to disprove this first study that was conducted in 2006. And it was amongst 300,000 children, by the way.
Sure.
About 126,000, just short of 126,000 boys, and the rest were all girls. And they looked at it. They published the findings on the
Right.
boys, not on the girls. And I'd like to, I know that one of the researchers, so I'll get that information from him.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that they now try to disprove this first study. And in 2016, they came out with this thing called the Optimus study. It was conducted by UCT, and they came back with this result. 33.9% of all girls will be sexually abused by age of 16, and
Sure.
36.8% of all boys. So again, a higher proportion of boys are suffering sexual abuse than girls. But the most interesting construct for me was in the first study, they discovered that the boys who were sexually abused or raped as children were 4 times more likely to perpetrate a rape.
Sure.
So this is why we see this escalation of rape stats year on year. I don't think since, wow, I don't know, 1990,
Yeah.
just to say, I do not think there has been 1 year where the rape
Yeah.
stats have decreased.
Yeah.
I've not
Yeah.
seen that. They're going up. GBV is going up. Everything is just going up
Yeah.
and going up, and it's getting worse now because there's no effective
Correct.
policing.
Yeah.
People are just going off the charts. Massive unemployment, a lot of stress, a lot of alcohol consumption, and unfortunately, what alcohol does is it just lowers your I was going to say, I can't think of the right
The
word. It
inhibitions.
lowers your inhibitions. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you end up doing those stupid things
Yeah.
that you've been thinking about, but now suddenly because of the alcohol, you're emboldened and you go out and you do the stupid things that you've always been thinking about.
Right.
So we need to kind of look at it in that sense. And this is why I say, let's not stop treating girls, right?
Right.
Let's not take away. I mean, in South Africa, we have over 400 victim empowerment centers
Yeah.
around the country.
Yeah.
Okay. Of those, only 16 openly service boys and girls,
Sure.
right? The rest of them, right? And there's only one center, Matrix Men, who only looks after boys, right?
Sure.
So there's a serious lack of services and provision for boys,
Yes.
even though boys suffer, at a
Yeah.
high rate. So we need to start opening that up and opening those conversations,
Yeah.
because as long as we keep denying the fact that boys are victims of sexual abuse, they're never going to come back and look for help.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah,
So good.
and to a large extent, I believe, but this is a personal
Yeah.
opinion, that our mental health state amongst men in this country is at an all-time low because of these incredibly high numbers of boys that are sexually abused and abused.
Right. Right.
Definitely, in my mind, childhood trauma plays into depression, anxiety, suicidality, and all that sort of stuff.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And addiction.
Yeah. What I find interesting from what you've shared is that whether it is a boy or a girl, a man or a woman, there's often a root of trauma or abuse in that. And I think this is what makes it difficult, even when we have the conversation around GBV and why it's tempting to say, well, women are suffering and we're seeing the killings amongst women by their intimate partners, which is an interesting one because I guess we don't have proper statistics at the moment. You're just hearing headlines, and so the typical thing with the headline is you're assuming that the women are majority the victims and the men are the perpetrators. It's the perception it gives, without looking at the actual numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, even with the
Yeah.
rapes, you this when the minister of police is releasing his annual quarterly stats around crime and things, and they talk about rape, you're hearing once again, this is how many women have suffered, but yet I think what I would love to, I guess, take away from this or to highlight is it's usually the root, and I think you touched on it a bit. The root is often already pre-existing history within the perpetrator, man or women, of a trauma, suffered an abuse, and abuse being a wide category, of course, right? So abuse is sexual, it can be physical, it can be
Yes. emotional.
emotional, financial, and
Yeah,
psychological, mental abuse. And of course, there's no telling how that manifests within a person, So when you were talking about those who are likely to be perpetrators of the abuse themselves, although that is a particularly limited statistics, I feel like there's something there. There's definitely something there
there's
for everyone else who is a perpetrator. Probably 9 times out of 10, you find that the perpetrators have a history of abuse themselves of a form.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's always interesting. We carry on about men who murder and femicide and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Interesting stats, though. I love
Right.
research because in the field that I work in, right, you don't just walk in and go, more boys are sexually abused than girls, because you'll get shot. You'll get murdered.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
You got some angry activists there who go like rubbish.
Yeah.
You know. So I learned very early on that I needed research and I
Right.
needed statistics, and you can't argue with those. I didn't make them up; they're
Right.
there. So the FBI has done a study where they took 10 years worth of murder
Hmm.
stats in the USA, and they broke them down into gender and who that gender murdered, right? So yes, so it turns out 80% of all murders are perpetrated by men,
Sure.
right? 20% murders are perpetrated by women,
Mm.
but with men, an 82% of the time will murder a stranger,
Hmm.
okay? And the balance of the time, they will murder a loved one. Women, 60% of the time, will murder
Sure.
a loved one, and the balance will be a stranger. Okay?
Yeah.
When you work the numbers out, it's almost as many intimate partners of women as intimate partners of men.
Mm.
There was a difference of I think about 120
Mm.
over 10 years.
Mm.
So women had murdered 120 less intimate partners or family.
Yeah.
And men had murdered slightly more, but 80% of the time men do tend to murder strangers,
Sure.
unfortunately.
Sure.
And again, I always, we come back to, why do men murder, or why do people murder at the end of
Right.
the day?
Right.
So, when it comes to intimate partner murders, or filicide
Mm.
is probably a better expression for that,
Right.
then it's pretty much on
Mm.
par, pretty much on par,
Mm.
the amount of women murdering intimate partners and men murdering intimate partners.
And
We
Martin,
just don't like to talk about
sorry to interject there, but is there a similar study that's been done in South Africa? Because like I said, I think the perception, and I even here, having this conversation with you, have it in the back of my mind that, and in the conversations we've had, with peers, in more professional spaces, is we almost can link certain things and behaviors to not just the trauma and experiences of many, but in South Africa particularly, there's also culture that sometimes, I want to say, is a gatekeeper to some of these things, what a role of a man is, what the role of a woman is. I can't speak for in America because the dynamics may be different, but I'm really interested in what we're seeing here in South Africa, because I'm trying to understand, and maybe you can chime in there, from the context of who is walking into Matrix Men, who you're dealing with, and I'm not speaking specifically to the men. Do you find that is a
talking
barrier?
color.
Yeah.
You talk, you're talking culture.
Yeah.
We do a large proportion of our clients are Black, Afrikaans, and English.
Sure.
Weirdly enough, so I would say pretty
Right.
much on par.
Right.
So as many Black people as Afrikaans people and white people.
Yeah.
English, white. Yeah, I hate these things, right?
Right.
Yes. Anyway, the areas where we're struggling to break through are the colored and Indian communities.
Sure.
They're really, and through talking to the guys that have come in, it's because the communities are so tightly knit, right?
Mm.
They kind of live in each other's pockets. You'll go into an Indian family and you'll find the brothers, the sisters, the in-laws, everybody stays in like on one property in one house,
Yes.
and the community are very, very interlinked. And same with coloreds. The communities are. In Afrikaans sê hulle almal weet almal se besigheid.
Right.
Everybody
Exactly.
knows everybody's
Business.
story, right?
Um,
And the guys that I was talking to, they were like, you know what? If this gets out that I was raped as a child, it's not just my family or the neighbors or whatever, it's the whole community that will laugh at me and write me off.
sure.
And they just can't break that barrier, you know?
Mm,
Whereas, you know, I find my best clients are seriously black men.
sure.
Honestly, they get it. They get
Yeah.
it. They absolutely get it. Black men will come in, 6, 7 sessions, bam, life's changed, man. They keen, they really go for it. They do the work, they do what they have to do. Amazing. You know,
Mm,
white guys, they like to argue and talk about
sure.
things. It's like, dude, just listen,
Sure.
you know. So I find it's
Yeah.
interesting, you know. It's just, you know, and the weird thing is like the black community goes like, hey, you know, the psychology is the white man's problem, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, cool,
Sure.
and the nice, but the beautiful thing is that when the guys finally break down and they come in and they say, okay, help me,
And
they
help.
just get
Yeah.
it. They really do.
Yeah. That's
And it's
so,
amazing to work with them because they listen and they take everything to
yeah.
heart, you know. So you're my best clients.
Yeah. So that's interesting, and thank you for answering that. Because again, like I said, these are perceptions that are out there. You're demystifying this, I think, even for me, because like I said, I think there isn't a real time understanding of who exactly. So for a matrix men, and I'm coming to the point around support systems, safe spaces for men, because you've got a matrix men, which is the only organization, within Africa or South Africa that's currently doing this work solely with men, which is unbelievable, given the statistics
Yeah.
you were mentioning earlier on. But outside of an organization like a Matrix Men, safe spaces, how do we create these? I'm narrowing this to men specifically. Of course, this could apply also to women, but I think women, there's this almost like women tend to be easily vulnerable in almost any space where they find an ear, and I think it's quite easy for women to share their stories, even if they're really difficult. Whereas with men, it's the perception. I mean, I had a colleague many years ago who said to me, the way we are as men is we could be friends, come to a gathering, a braai or whatever. I will spend 6 hours at this braai with these guys, and they won't know that back home I actually don't have anything to eat. The electricity's out because I couldn't pay for it, and I will really just keep cool the whole time and not mention a word. And I thought, he's not the first man who said something similar to me. I guess it's the way being a man has been presented to men and to the world. But
Yeah.
um, back to the safe spaces. What does that look like? How do we create spaces for men to talk to us?
Well, it's easier said than done. Look, we've got a lot of men's circles, and so there are groups starting up now.
Mm,
A lot of big corporates are becoming acutely aware of the issues that the men are
mm,
facing. Because let's face it, I mean, life is changing for everybody, but for men, it is changed dramatically.
sure.
It's this attack on masculinity. It's
Mm,
this, well, you can't be a masculine man. So men are walking
mm,
around, they're confused. We don't know what the hell we're supposed to be.
mm.
So our construct is that there's good and bad in everybody,
Right.
right?